Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz easily had one of the bloodiest, most intense, and most entertaining rivalries in the UFC. Both fighters squared off a total of 2 times with the odds leveled at 1-1. They still have the occasional exchange on Twitter, but did you know Khabib actually became a peacemaker for them? Yep, and speaking of Khabib, Brendan Schaub slammed him for his comments about Islam Makhachev. Keep watching for more on both stories. First up, the Peacemaker. Khabib is probably the last guy we'd expect to be a peacemaker for Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. The Eagle doesn't really have any history with the Stockton gangster, but if we're talking about the Irishman, their rivalry will probably go down as one of the most intense in the history of the UFC. Where do we even start? That whole episode when Conor filled up a personal jet with his boys and ambushed a bus with Khabib in it, the legendary trash talking, and of course, how can we forget their clash after UFC 229? UFC 196 was also a really eventful night when Diaz shocked the fight world in a bloody matchup against the Irishman, putting him away with an impressive rear naked choke. In fact, Khabib also put him away in a similar fashion when he choked him out in the 4th round of the fight to finally put an end to all the drama. But how is the Eagle a peacemaker? What did he say or do to settle the Conor-Diaz rivalry? Well, if we're being honest, he did absolutely nothing. Nate recently tweeted a picture of him choking McGregor at UFC 196 with the caption, "So I choked you better and faster than Kebab did." And guess what the Irishman replied with? He didn't upload a classic voice message threatening to jump Nate the next time he saw him or something, nor did he say anything about how he's a either. All he wrote was respect. Khabib has another achievement to his name now. He's the first fighter to make peace between the Irishman and an opponent of his. Next, a weird form of respect. It might seem odd, but is it just us, or do Nate and Conor have this weird form of respect for each other? They definitely don't back down when it comes to roasting each other, but remember how both of their fights ended? Covered in blood, but still embracing each other after grueling rounds. We don't know about you, but that's respect right there. Believe it or not, this tweet actually ignited a blown-out discussion on Reddit, with fans talking about how both these guys are fans of each other. We wouldn't exactly say they're fans, but yeah, you can tell there's a lot of respect between them. Plus, you also have to keep in mind how both these men are showmen and know very well how to get people talking and hyped up. Their periodic but entertaining exchanges on Twitter might just be enough to keep people talking and stay relevant, because we don't think they hate each other enough to start fighting if they ever crossed paths or something. And while the majority of MMA fans can't get over how Nate and the Irishman have finally agreed on something, one Reddit user came up with a really interesting proposition. They wrote how interesting it would be to watch a tag team match with Team Conor and Diaz going up against Team Khabib and Islam. We know it's never going to happen, but we think all the fans really need to say thank you to Khabib for playing the role of a peacemaker between the electrifying fighters. There is something else though. Moving on, a possible trilogy. Conor McGregor isn't keeping his interest in a trilogy matchup against the Stockton gangster a secret. When Nate retired earlier this year after a victory over Tony Ferguson, McGregor took to Twitter and congratulated him for such a successful and iconic career, and even said they'll meet inside the cage someday for their trilogy matchup. And after retirement, even Nate has been caught talking about how a trilogy fight is the only thing that could make him reconsider returning to the UFC. So could it be all this is just an act to keep people interested? And we're not saying all this is drama mama or something. There's probably a lot of respect between them. But like we said earlier, both these guys are showmen. They know how to build hype, sell out arenas, and make the UFC a boatload of money. And who knows, there might just be something going on behind the scenes we don't know about, because this is a fight not even Dana would want to refuse. He knows how much star power both these fighters have, and if they were to return for one last matchup, it would be a full house with profits in the millions. But that's just what we think. A lot of fans think they'll never fight again, and the closest thing we'll ever get to a trilogy fight is their ongoing feud on Twitter. We're not too sure about that though. This is the UFC, and considering how crazy 2022 has been, anything can happen in the future. It might even end up happening in Dana White's Power Slap League. Now for he's siding with him just because of kebab. A lot of MMA fans still think the only reason why McGregor is cozying up to Nate is that he insulted Khabib by calling him kebab. Honestly, we wouldn't really call that an insult, but it was more of a swipe at McGregor since he was the one getting choked out. Fans think that Conor was so caught up with the fact that Nate, a former rival of his, insulted Khabib that he forgot it was actually him being roasted. We don't really agree with that because you could be the best fighter in the world and you'd still have a lot of haters. If Nate and the Irishman are having a pleasant moment for once, then the last thing fans should do is think they have a mutual hatred for the Eagle. Believe it or not, some people actually think the former double champion is so embarrassed by Khabib that he'll side with anyone who takes a swipe at him. We'd like to remind everyone again, Nate wasn't taking a dig at the former lightweight champion. All he said was he did a better job at choking Conor out. That's it. There's no reason to make this about Conor and Khabib, or McGregor, Diaz versus the Eagle for that matter. It was some fun banter, and judging from what we've seen, both of these guys genuinely respect each other. If you want to see real hatred and disrespect, we'd advise you to have a look at how things ended at UFC 229. But yeah, it was nothing but some banter, and every fighter is guilty of doing that every now and then. Following up, Brendan Schaub weighs in on Islam's legacy. Being coached by one of the greatest lightweight champions in the history of the UFC is a privilege not many fighters have. Islam Makhachev is in very good hands as the Eagle himself has taken up the job to make sure he leaves behind an unprecedented legacy. And if we're being honest, Khabib didn't even say what Brendan is arguing here. So there's this clip of Nurmagomedov where he's talking about how Islam should look to defend his title at least 5 to 6 times before hanging up the gloves. His reasoning behind that was also really simple. Since Islam is at his peak right now, defending the lightweight title for an odd 5 times won't be too difficult, but as the years pass, he'll eventually have to leave the sport. Brendan, a former UFC fighter turned comedian, completely twisted his words and thinks Khabib is trying to say Makhachev should drop the act and not fight till the end. If you've watched some of our videos in the past, then you probably know how big we're on about fighters knowing when to hang up the gloves. We always take Tony Ferguson's name because he's a classic example of a fighter who seriously needs to hang up the gloves now. We're not trying to throw any shade at him and think he's done wonders for the UFC, but the way he's been getting beaten up to a pulp in his last couple of fights clearly shows age has caught up to him. If Islam isn't capable of defending his title after 5-ish fights, then it would be perfectly normal to leave the sport. Up next, here's what Brendan Schaub understood. Co-host of the Golden Hour podcast, Brendan Schaub thinks Khabib meant Islam should just hang up the gloves if he can't defend it. That's not what he meant. That's exactly like saying he should just retire if he can't defend his title at UFC 284 against Alexander Volkanovski. All he said was that the goal is 5 or 6 title defenses, and it doesn't necessarily mean he should leave the sport if he loses. Just imagine for a second he loses at UFC 284. Will he hang up the gloves? Absolutely not. He's going to climb the rankings again, get another shot at the title, and try to defend it again. He's not going to suck up and go home or something. So the fact that Brendan is going around saying it's very weak of Khabib to say all that about Makhachev is wrong, because at this point, all he's doing is twisting his words and jumping to conclusions. And look, we really like Shab. We think he's a really funny guy, but coming up with your own theory about what he meant is kind of unfair here. You can't go around calling him weak after giving his words a new meaning. Last but not least, he's not alone though. Shab isn't alone though. A lot of fighters agree with him and think Khabib is trying to enforce his ideology on the young champion. And if we're talking about Nurmagomedov's career in particular, some big names in the fight world think he retired too soon before going up against guys like Oliveira and Dariush. But at the same time, you could just argue it's called quitting while you're ahead. It's just a matter of perspective. That's it from our side, folks. So what do you think? Did you ever expect Khabib would be the peacemaker between Nate and Conor? Let us know in the comments below. Remember, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.